I want to give you your first tip. Your first tip is to remove money from yourself. So that means put yourself on a budget. For the love of God, put yourself on a budget. Now, there are some percentage breakdowns on budgeting. There used to be you've probably heard your parents say, well, you should never pay more than 30% on your housing and this much towards your savings, 15% towards your, okay. Now, let's say you're making $100,000 a year. Do you necessarily need to spend 30% of your annual income on your housing? Probably not. So why not maybe only spend 15% of your housing, 15% of your budget on your housing, and take the other 15% and throw that into a high yield account that you don't have to touch for 10 years, right? So the 30% rule, it's a rule of thumb, but don't hold on to it too tightly. Take a look at your individual earnings, your annual earnings, and see what you can do within that. Now, some people, if you're making $30,000 a year, you may go over that, right? So then you're going to have to maybe pick up a side job or something like that. But 30%, I'm just bringing it up because we've heard that a lot growing up, and given the current economy that we live in, that can be too much towards your housing, and it could also be not enough depending on where you're at. I want you to think of your budget in terms of your minimum living expenses, just what you need to survive from, and whatever's left out of that, whatever you can stash away a little bit of time, you need to put into an emergency savings fund. So that is the first tip, removing money from yourself so that you can give yourself money later in the event that you need it. Say you get into an accident and you have to get a new car, or we don't have any control over these type of travesties of life, and they're going to come, they're going to happen. Me personally, I got sick a couple years ago and I could not work at the club. I had trouble seeing, I had trouble walking, and I lost a lot of shifts and I had a lot of medical bills. So I completely depleted what I had in savings. Luckily for me, I had a little bit, but I didn't have enough. So it really hit me pretty hard. I had to work while I was sick, and that was a very tough time in my life. So what you need most is that emergency savings fund. Now you're thinking, okay, well, how much is that? I don't know. Rule of thumb for most people that are employees, 3 months of your minimum living expenses. That's just the rent, no Netflix subscriptions, none of the facials and all that crap. Whatever that number comes up to. So say that's $1,500 a month for you. $1,500 a month times 3. That is your emergency savings fund. Now, we are not employees. We are contractors. So we are hired at will and fired at will of the company, the club that we work for, right? So my rule of thumb is 6 months. That's where I feel okay. But honestly, I feel way better if I have 9 months stashed away. I had to dip into that a little bit to pay my taxes this year, and it is driving me crazy. I cannot wait to fill that fund up so that I can rest easy in the event that I may need more time off of work. Now, if you're someone that has another skill set, that maybe you have another job that you work concurrently with the club job, you're going to school and you're about to be hireable in another industry, maybe 3 months is good for you. But if you're someone that's, say, planning for maybe extended period of time off, like pregnancy or something like that, because we don't get paid time off, you want to make sure that you have a little bit more of a fat emergency savings fund. So that's the first tip. Tip number 1, remove money from yourself. Give yourself a budget, minimum living expenses, and whatever's left over, a little bit every month, start dumping a little bit of that into an emergency savings fund. If you need any resources or referrals on what types of accounts you can put that fund into, I highly suggest not putting it in a checking account, because that has no interest whatsoever. That money is actually, if you let that money sit there long enough, over time, that $1 is worth way less. Inflation annually accounts for about 3%, right? So if you let $1 sit there for 10 years, it's gonna lose about 3% or so every year, right? So you're actually taking money away from yourself if you just leave it somewhere that doesn't accrue interest. Put it in a money market account, at the very least, something like 2% interest, so that you can offset the rule of inflation that we live in this economy.